Esther, King Charles hosted his first state visit since the coronation for the South Korean President and First Lady. A lavish occasion as always. Can you run us through the formalities?
Yeah, so this is King Charles's first incoming state visit, and it's a 4-day state visit, and the government obviously chose South Korea to be the first state visit for the king. It kicked off with a very lavish banquet with over 170 guests. Interestingly enough, including the K-pop group Blackpink, which I'm embarrassingly a fan of, and a Birmingham City football player. You had all sorts of dignitaries and heads of state. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, and his wife were there. Lord Cameron and his wife were also there, who is now the Foreign Secretary. So it was quite a lavish state affair. I mean, it had over 4,000 pieces, including sort of dinner plates and all the crockery that comes with it. It was a very lavish affair. The king was there with his wife and the Queen, Queen Camilla, the Princess Royal Anne, and the Kate and William were also there as well, dressed, to the nines. And it was a very lavish affair. I think one thing to recognize is the significance of these kinds of state visits. So obviously South Korea is the 13th largest economy in the world. But, in Europe, in terms of the amount of trade they do, we're actually only the 5th largest trading partner with South Korea. We should actually probably be the first or the second, given the size of Britain's economy. So this is a very important visit from the president of South Korea and his wife. We know that the reason why this state visit was chosen was because of, the growing trade and infrastructure and security relationship between Britain and South Korea. Obviously, the government wants to woo South Korea to sign a potential green technology and infrastructure deal worth up to £30 billion. So it's obviously very important. But the reason why, the king was chosen to effectively head up this event is because these are the kinds of things that work. We know that the Queen, the late Queen, had many state visits during her time, and it actually went a long way in boosting Britain's relationships with lots of countries around the world. And this is no different. Obviously, the first incoming state visit does make a great statement, considering, this is the first one of King Charles's reign, and I would argue that it was a success. Obviously, this kind of soft diplomacy really does go down well, and it actually is very popular with world leaders around the world. I mean, given the kind of press coverage that the president of South Korea would get, being pictured with the king and having Blackpink getting honorary MBEs and all of those sorts of things, these kind of things boost the local popularity of politicians around the world. So it is a very mutually beneficial kind of engagement, and it just highlights one of the gems of the royal family. The fact that, many politicians could only dream to have the approval ratings that the king currently does have. But these kinds of soft diplomacy moves that are actually very important to keeping Britain's relevance, particularly in a post-Brexit world where the country is looking to open up and have all sorts of bilateral deals with different countries.
Now on to the Sussexes, and Omid Scobie's new book Endgame is due to be released on the 28th of November. While it appears to be the rehashing of old allegations, it's now alleged that 2 royals made remarks about Archie's potential skin colour. Is that right, Esther?
Well, this is according to Omid Scobie, who has effectively got his meal ticket. He's someone who's reported on the royal family for decades, but now his alleged proximity with the Sussexes and having written their autobiography has meant that he seems to have an inside knowledge into what happened between the Sussexes and members of the royal family, at least from the Sussexes' perspective. At the end of the day, the issue of, who commented on what the potential skin colour of Archie would look like has not really gone down very well with the British public. Particularly in my case, I mean, if I had a child with someone who was not black, my family, with impunity, would probably place bets on the skin colour of that child. I do think that there's an element of bad faith in terms of their interaction that this alleged kind of situation happened under. I don't think that it screams of racism to be curious about what the child of a biracial couple would look like. I don't even think that's particularly that interesting. I mean, when I saw Meghan Markle, I thought she was Puerto Rican. So I find it very curious that it's somehow now racist to assume what someone's child would look like. I also think there is a bit of unfair judgment going on here. I mean, Meghan Markle's mother, it wasn't an interracial relationship when she did have Meghan Markle, and I don't think members of her family would be accused of being racist for wondering what Meghan would have looked like when she was born. But obviously, we have to remember that Omid Scobie this is not an official sanctioned autobiography from the Sussexes. This is just something that Omid Scobie has written, given his proximity to the Sussexes, and apparently they're friends. This is something that's very much from his perspective. So we have to treat it with a grain of salt. We can't take it as the truth. And, you know, it's very clear that he is benefiting, he's profiting a lot from his relationship with the Sussexes. I mean, a lot of the revelations from this book have been headline news here in Britain. So clearly there is money to be made. But if we're going to treat what he is saying as gospel and say that actually it was more than one member of the royal family that was speculating about the colour of Meghan and Harry's child, I do think that there's an element of bad faith, and I don't think it screams of racism like the Sussexes at least would think it does.
In a similar vein, the book also alleges that the royal family chose not to get involved in the BLM movement. Now, I'm not sure whether that's an insinuation that the royal family is racist, but frankly, given the social and political binfire that surrounded BLM, I think the royals probably did the right thing in staying well away from it.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting that now their proximity to the BLM movement is somehow a barometer for whether they're against racism or not. I mean, in the book, Omid Scobie said that, you know, in all his years of being a royal correspondent, he was surprised by their lax and laissez-faire attitude towards issues that had to do with racism and discrimination, which is, you know, very much, I highly doubt is true. You know, the Queen had relationships with many world leaders, and you wouldn't get the inclination that the royal family were in any way racist. So this is very much written from his perspective. I do think it was a wise move on the royal family's part to not get involved in the BLM, you know, movement. We do know that elements of the police, for instance, here in Britain, have really undermined public trust by seeing, you know, police chiefs bending the knee at BLM riots, for instance, in the capital, when it really had very little to do with Britain or our race relations here in this country. It was very much an American import, and it's something that has taken years to fight against and to unwind and to actually unpick the intricacies of actually race relations here in Britain and how they differ from the US. And I think instinctively the royal family knew that, which is why one of the reasons why they chose to stay away from it. Again, taking Omid Scobie's word on the royal family's approach to BLM or just movements to highlighting racism and discrimination is not very wise, because he doesn't seem like a very credible source. I mean, there are many questions around who his sources are in the royal family. It doesn't look like he has many friends in Buckingham Palace, and the only real contact he seems to have is with the Sussexes, who are more and more trying to distance themselves from this book. I mean, it's clear that they are trying to move on from this whole kind of royal family saga, even though this is a can of worms that they themselves opened by having that interview with Oprah Winfrey and Harry's book Spare. So they can't really complain.
Now, we've spoken before about the Sussexes' eviction from Frogmore Cottage, but it's now been reported that apparently it was Princess Anne who persuaded the King to follow that course of action. Is that right?
Well, this is another sort of allegation made by Omid Scobie's book, but it would not surprise me. I mean, one of the things that is being alleged with this is the fact that Princess Anne said that she believed that the Sussexes, were work shy, and that they shouldn't have access to the cottage because they weren't, putting in the work. Now, I don't think that's completely not believable, because we do know that the Princess Royal is one of the hardest working members of the royal family. She engaged in the most engagements last year, and I wouldn't be surprised if she actually got a bit firmer with the Sussexes than probably King Charles was willing to do. We know that they renovated the cottage at an expense of £2.4 million, which they eventually paid back to the public. But it is clear that there was a bit of a disconnect between their expectations of what they would be like in the royal family and what the royal family is about. I mean, in Princess Eugenie's podcast, she mentioned that she was raised, and it was a doctrine growing up in the royal family, that you don't overshare too much about your personal life and your private details. Now, that's very much all in the vein of what the Sussexes are interested in. They are known for oversharing. They talk about their feelings all the time. All we hear is their feelings. And you can see that that's something that wouldn't have gone down well in the royal family as well as their expectations of what their work schedule would be like. We know that Prince Harry did mention that he talked to his father about feeling overworked, to which his father said he should hire a personal assistant. Again, I don't think that went down very well with the Sussexes, but there's clearly a very different kind of work culture and just attitude to public service between the Sussexes and the royal family. So while I'm very skeptical about anything that comes out of the very surgically enhanced Omid Scobie's mouth, I don't think this is totally false.
And despite the rancour within the royal family, Esther, we're starting to see this increasing stream of reports about Harry wanting to come home. Is there anything really in this? And if so, what's the block?
So apparently Harry is one half of the Sussex team that's actually willing to reconcile with the royal family, which is understandable. It is his family. Apparently Meghan wants nothing to do with it. She's been quoted as saying that she doesn't want to take part in the soap opera, which again is strange because being a part of that soap opera and media circus is how they basically funded their lives for the last 3 years. But that's neither here nor there. But apparently Prince Harry is not bothered about receiving an apology, which is strange because I don't understand why he thinks he deserves one. But he just wants to reconcile with the family. At the end of the day, I've always made the point that this sort of rift between the Sussexes and the royal family is bigger than them. We know that King Charles only has 5 grandchildren and he's basically estranged from 2 of them. This man is in his mid-70s, and we know that, you know, the older one gets in life, the more you think about your family and what you're leaving behind. It's a shame that he only has a close relationship with 3 of his grandchildren, which is William's kids. And so I suspect that it's dawning on both of them that it's probably time to try and heal this rift between the Sussexes and the royal family, to actually give, you know, Archie and Lilibet the opportunity to get to know their cousins and members of their extended family. I still find it strange that Meghan and Harry insisted on giving their children the prince and princess titles, even though they've made it very clear that they want very little to do with the royal family. But it's clear that it would probably be in both of their interests to reconcile. Now, obviously, there's the issue of the British public and how the British public want nothing to do with the Sussexes. I think it would be quite controversial if the king welcomed them with open arms and started to kind of integrate them into the fold and got them more involved in royal engagements. I highly doubt that will happen because I suspect it would be deeply unpopular. But also there is the issue of Prince William and Prince Harry's relationship, which is at the crux of this. Apparently there's no trust between the brothers. There's nothing that happens between them that's not briefed to the press, and we don't know who it's coming from. You know, how Harry would say it's coming from his brother. William would say, well, you're the one that released the Netflix documentary and a book talking about your Todger. So it's probably more likely that it came from his end of things. And so it's a very complicated relationship, but one would hope that at least behind closed doors, they would be working towards healing that rift, at least for the sake of the children.
And the breakdown of the relationship between the Fab Four as they were known, that didn't exactly happen overnight. Look, it's been blamed, an allegation that it's been blamed on a breakdown in communication between Kate and Meghan. But is that really a fair observation?
I mean, it does look to be the case. I mean, we obviously heard allegations that apparently Catherine made Meghan cry during the preparation of her wedding, and Catherine wasn't very fond of Meghan for saying that she had baby brain when she was pregnant with her 3rd child. We'll never actually know the real story behind it, but I don't find it hard to believe. Again, you have to understand that the royal family is quite unique in the sense that it's quite traditional. There are obviously ranks. Catherine is going to be the future queen, so she obviously outranks Meghan. We don't know if that actually had a role in kind of the acrimony that's clearly witnessed in their relationship and how cold it is now. But we do know that being the same age, they should have probably had more in common and you know, been closer. They're both very intelligent, very beautiful, very articulate women and very powerful, you know, public figures. But for some reason, their relationship was broken down to the extent that even when, you know, during the Queen's funeral, when they did that walk around, they were on opposite ends of each other. They just really, it was clear that they didn't have a very warm relationship. And we know from royal correspondence that actually that walk around was a very difficult thing for Catherine, because clearly she didn't want to have to do that. We don't know if that's true, but these are the allegations we're hearing and we have no reason to doubt them. So I suspect it did likely come from a breakdown in communication between Meghan and Catherine, which is unfortunate. Now, I don't know who is to blame. I still suspect that it's just Meghan's unrealistic and probably detached expectations of what it would be like to be in the royal family, how to relate with people and all of that. And, you know, that probably likely played a role in the breakdown of the relationship between the pair.
And finally, one last thing. It's also alleged that William is trying to muscle his way into running the royal family. Now, the Prince and Princess have definitely taken on a greater share of the work, but that appears to be, from where I'm looking, part of the leaning and modernising strategy of the royal family. Do you think this Barb's a little bit cute?
I mean, I think it's completely ridiculous. He was obviously always going to be the future king. He doesn't have to muscle his way into something that is his birthright. But I also think you have to be reasonable in assuming that the reason why they've taken on more responsibilities is because they have fewer resources to draw upon. You know, one of the optimistic hopes of the Sussexes joining the fold was the fact that they were going to unburden senior members of the royal family by taking on more of this work. We're starting to see it with Meghan and Harry going to South Africa on their tour. But obviously that didn't come to fruition. And so, you know, the work has had to be spread out. The Edinburghs, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh have also had to take on a lot of work. They've been to Canada recently to have royal engagement. So I think it's more to do with the fact that there are genuinely just fewer people and fewer resources to draw upon, as opposed to, you know, William trying to muscle his way in. He is going to lead the royal family one day. That is without question. So he will obviously take a more leading role. But I don't think it's because he's greedy or power hungry or anything of the sort. I genuinely think it's just because that is the role that he was born into, and there are just fewer workers to carry out the work.
Thank you for your insights as always. Esther Krakue, thank you for joining us.